For years now, we've been wondering what the next step is for the Star Wars universe, especially when it comes to continuing the story past the sequel trilogy. Even though we have some unofficial details/official details, I still don't think they know what they're doing. Welcome to Star Wars Uplink. It's been a while since we've gotten a new Star Wars movie. We've gotten obviously tons of Star Wars TV shows, and we've got a new one called Skeleton Crew that is on the horizon. But in this gap, which honestly, if you look at the history of Star Wars, isn't necessarily out of the ordinary, because if you look at the gap between the original trilogy to the prequels and then the prequels to the sequels, there was obviously a large stretch of time that is much greater than the one that we're experiencing right now. But what was different is obviously the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy were a way for George Lucas to pair storytelling with technological advances in filmmaking, and it was motivated by his need to go back into the universe. Now that Disney has taken the reins, we have had more Star Wars since Disney has taken over than the entire history of Star Wars before that point, but I don't think it's ever felt more confused and less confident. I want to explain that a little bit. Star Wars under Disney started off on the right foot. I think many agree that The Force Awakens, while unoriginal, was still a good romp. It called back to a lot of the nostalgia that we have towards Star Wars, and I think it did a decent job with setting up the characters. And then continue on with Rogue One, which is hailed as the best from the Disney Star Wars era. They, again, did a good job. The turning point, I feel like a lot of things changed, especially with people's perception of Star Wars, was The Last Jedi. And I think that is where all of this really starts. And this has not come from someone that hates The Last Jedi. I think The Last Jedi is one of the best from the sequel trilogy in terms of it tried to actually say something with Star Wars and really push a message forward that I found interesting. Did it necessarily continue the story that The Force Awakens set up? I don't think it did a good job of that. But if you look at it from a standalone perspective, it's a great movie because it talks about how anyone can have an impact on the galaxy. It doesn't matter who your family is, you can have an impact, which is then completely thrown out the window when you go to The Rise of Skywalker, which I think is also the continuation of the downfall. The Last Jedi set up the dominoes for The Rise of Skywalker to really push down and kind of mess everything up. I know there's a lot of people that enjoy The Rise of Skywalker. I'm not one of them. It is the clearest example of Disney on its back foot. It is an example that could not be clearer when it comes to the point where Disney does not know how to handle the Star Wars fandom. It didn't know how to guide this story in a way that set up for the future, because it immediately went on to nostalgia baiting. It immediately went on to, oh hey, let's try to like adjust all the things that people had criticisms from The Last Jedi on, and let's get the safe bet with bringing J.J. Abrams back, even though J.J. Abrams has said himself in interviews that he does not handle ending stories well. He's much more of a person to set up stories. So it's just really disappointing. And I feel like The Last Jedi set up a lot of the failures that we now see when it comes to what Star Wars is. Because while it did push forward this idea of like telling a new story and a story that is beyond what the past came from, it was trying to build a foundation for a new type of Jedi. Rise of Skywalker kind of put the nail in the coffin of that idea and just really pushed forward on this idea that The Force Awakens setup, which is let's try to find nostalgia in ways that we can just push this forward and as safe as possible recoup the money that we spent on Star Wars. I feel like Lucasfilm as a whole, especially in this modern era with its oversight by Disney, has struggled in its balance of nostalgia versus trying new ideas. I think the clearest example of this is the most recent Indiana Jones movie, The Dial of Destiny, where you have this heavy push towards nostalgia without a good step forward with what makes Indiana Jones work very well. And I enjoyed the movie, honestly. Like, I didn't have many gripes with it. It felt very similar to the past examples of Indiana Jones that we've had. But there was just something lacking when it came to this idea. And you can see the performance of the movie not doing very well because of the fact that they leaned so heavily on nostalgia bait. And I think you can continue that with the Disney TV shows as well, where you have like good examples of pushing the ball forward with season 1 of The Mandalorian, and also Andor seasons 1 and soon to be season 2, where you have this example of them taking this idea, especially when you look at Andor, of something that we've seen before and something that was successful, new in the Disney era, which is Rogue One, expanding on a character from that movie, and then pushing the ball forward in terms of fleshing out the universe that ultimately builds for the events of the original trilogy to happen. I think that is a good balance of trying these new ideas out with also sprinkling some nostalgia, but not leaning heavily on this idea of like, you see this character, you know where this character's from, you've definitely seen this character before. Yeah, look at this character's talking to this other character too, and they're in Star Wars. You know this is Star Wars? They didn't do that with Andor. Where this works is The Mandalorian season 1, and to a lesser extent, maybe season 2 of Mandalorian, where you have them implementing this idea. The first Star Wars TV show ever, Mandalorian season 1 comes out. It has a great balance of the classic Star Wars as well as the new Star Wars. It's got some of the sheen and technology of the new Star Wars with a massive budget, but also some of the good filmmaking techniques of the original trilogy, practical effects and a puppet, and this idea of like a faceless bounty hunter type character. Listening to the fans over the past 40 plus years on what they love about Star Wars the most, and then building on top of that. Everyone loves to see a bounty hunter. Everyone wanted to see a Boba Fett style show, and this is kind of the modern era for that. Where it starts to fail, though, is when they start stretching it too deeply, where you have the character of Ahsoka. Season 2 of Ahsoka, I think, works really well. Where it starts to fall down is Book of Boba Fett, which in and of itself is a failing of the Mandoverse time period, where you have big events happening inside of the Mandoverse that affects the Mandalorian, but it's not happening within the Mandalorian TV show. There are many reasons outside of the universe that cause this to happen, but I'm just focusing on in-universe in terms of like flow from seasons 2 to 3, where season 3 of The Mandalorian really fails in all of the ways that season 1 succeeded. Having a self-contained story that obviously affects the broader universe of Star Wars and connects to big characters that are in this space, but whereas Mandalorian used it as a backdrop, Mandalorian Season 3 uses that as the main focus. Instead of having the Mandalorian be the main character, you have him taking a step back to familiar faces being the leads on it, which is a shame when you look at the whole stint of things. And ultimately now when we get to the point where we have Star Wars announcing a Rey movie, moving that Rey movie, it's no longer happening in December of 2026, and then subsequently making an announcement that there is going to be a future trilogy of movies, and then continuing that with leaks to other reporting agencies, publications and all that stuff, that Rey is now the new Luke Skywalker, that the big bet that they weren't willing to commit to a few years ago, and honestly early this year there were reports that they weren't sure whether or not they wanted to continue with the Rey timeline. Now they are going to do that, and it's going to be a trilogy of movies, and Rey may have an Obi-Wan type role in this trilogy, or maybe this is all going to be about Rey, or maybe not, or maybe it will. Let's see what people react to. And I think Rey is an okay character as long as they treat her as Rey. Utilize the strengths of a new character instead of building this backbone of things that they wish they could have done with Luke Skywalker and now putting that onto her. I think if this is going to succeed, they need to move forward in a way that just does not rely on a bunch of cameos, but pushes forward a unique story that broadens the scope of what Star Wars and its story is. So there are my thoughts on Star Wars currently. It is a lot of reliance on finger pointing, oh, I know that character, without much depth underneath that. And I think as long as Disney, Star Wars, and Lucasfilm subsequently is scared of what they're going to announce, they will never succeed. If they are not confident in what they're going to do, we're never going to see, one, another Star Wars movie get released, but also I don't think we're ever going to see a Star Wars movie that people actually appreciate and enjoy. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Would love to hear those, and check out our podcast. As always, may the Force be with you.